This is a movie I want to see on the biggest screen possible with the loudest surround sound settings that I can get. And when I hear Kong or Godzilla punch the shit out of each other, I want to feel the theater reverberate and my body's shaking, my pulse is pounding. And I'm not going to get that on my home television. Welcome to the watering hole.
Here we are. Yeah, welcome to the watering hole.
We didn't attempt multiple takes of that. This is the first time you're hearing
This is the first time you're hearing it.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good.
We're back. We are back.
We always say we're back like we went somewhere.
I know, but I'm just excited to be back at this table.
It's true. This table it's good vibes. It's good vibes.
And it's getting better. You know, it's like feels like every time it feels so much more comfortable. We're on episode 20.
Is this 20?
This will be 20.
This is the big 2-0.
This is if it's not, we got to do another podcast. But I'm pretty sure it's 20.
Big 2-0, man. We're growing up.
Yeah, we're one away from being able to drink.
Ooh, it's about to get real. Aren't we 1 week away from you being able to drink?
Yeah, maybe it'll be a celebratory toast. I don't know.
There we go.
We'll figure it out.
We're turning 21 soon. I'm excited.
My man, I got to let you know. Got some exciting news in the Hollywood Reporter today.
Okay, hit me.
A couple days ago. Movie theaters could be opening up as soon as next week.
Really?
In LA.
What's the stipulations? What's
depends on the tiers. Depends on how we're in like purple tier. If you stay in purple tier one more week, they can open up. You have to be in the purple tier for like 2 weeks with no massively increasing numbers to be able to open up into the next phase.
And what do they open up with? 25%?
25% capacity. So still enough space between things.
So we can finally get Black Widow.
We can get Black Widow. The first thing that we're probably going to be seeing, because it'll be coming out, a week or two, will be Kong versus Godzilla.
I'm ready. Yeah!
Like, legitimately, this is a movie that I would not want to see in my home.
Oh, yeah.
It has outside, like, there's no story, character elements that I give a shit about. This is a movie I want to see on the biggest screen possible with the loudest surround sound settings that I can get. And when I hear Kong or Godzilla punch the shit out of each other, I want to feel the theater reverberate and my body's shaking, my pulse is pounding. And I'm not going to get that on my home television.
I'm sold, man. I'm sold.
Like, seriously, like bring
the theaters back. And passion.
And when we ask in today's day and age of streaming, what is, what differentiates streaming versus film? Like, where is that going to go? Movies like this, to me, will always be movie theater movies.
Yeah.
Always. I'm not saying that they're, like, actually, the early reviews are in for Falcon and Winter Soldier, which will come out next week. They're great. They say it starts out with great action from the get-go. So obviously you can do these things on the smaller screen, and they will be great. But there's just something about certain movies where you go, nuh-uh.
Well, not only that, so a big thing about the film industry, period, right? And this happens more so in, I think, the either comic book realm or superheroes, fantastical stuff, but just this idea that, like, this is the first time Kong and Godzilla are going toe-to-toe in like 50 years, right? Like, the last time we saw these two go toe-to-toe, they were really bad people in costumes,
right?
Doing some, like, we look back on it and we're like, wow, this is rough to watch, right? It's almost unwatchable if you're not from that generation, like if you weren't there when it first came out. And so this is a big moment. It's like when Yoda first it was on the screen and fighting Count Dooku. It's like people didn't get to see that. It was just little puppet Yoda. And so it's exciting.
It's going to be fun to see. And I mean, if you look at the freaking size differential between them back in those days, the 30s and the 50s, and the size that they are now, yeah, it's insane.
Oh,
it's insane.
It's so over the top that you could only then surmise that you have to witness it in an over the top fashion,
right?
Which means it has to be bigger than your home. It has to be that reverberate.
I would love if this movie was such an advertisement for having to see this in the movie theaters that if you saw it on your TV, you only got, like, Kong was cut in half. Like, you just see, like, his, like, the bottom half from his torso down. And you're like, oh, man, I guess I need a bigger screen for this.
At home, you don't even get facial expressions.
Yeah, it's just like, what's happening? I can't even see what's happening.
His belly button looks angry.
I guess I gotta go pay to see this in a theater.
Oh, God. That's our commercial. We're going to make that happen.
But it's going to be us dressed up in the bad costumes that you just said that you hated about the 50s movies.
You want above the waist? Better go to AMC. Hello.
AMC goes, we're literally not affiliated with these people.
We have no...
at all.
We will give you above navel. We will give you above navel.
So, yeah, man, I'm excited for that. Hopefully, we can actually begin to... Because I'm actually getting my second shot of the vaccine.
I have not gotten my first shot of the vaccine.
Yeah. So you'll die.
I will also be going with you to the theater.
Yeah, you'll die, but
and making it happen. No. I think I'm immune. I think I've got a level
like
of stubbornness that produces the right blood count.
You're like the guy in zombie movies that gets bit but just rolls the pants right over the bite mark.
Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. Why are you sweating? It's not sweat.
Ain't gonna happen to me.
Yeah, what are you talking about? It's fine. Put the gun down. Put the gun down.
Why you looking at me straight? It's like, I got bit. I didn't get bit.
Why you growling? I growl normally. It's usual.
I'm just really freaking hungry.
Yeah, you're being fucking weird, bro. Calm down.
So yeah, it'll be a good time. I'm excited. Things are just starting to open back up again. So
yeah, we're about to be back to normal.
Yeah, hopefully in the next 6 months or so, we can start getting an idea of normal, wherever that is.
We will see, my man.
All right. Well, being that this is the Watering Hole podcast, obviously we usually come up with introduce some thoughts that we've been having and stuff. And usually it's you that's bringing in the topics,
some random topics.
Yeah. But I had one that I was thinking about through the week, so I wanted to bring it up with you, let you know kind of what you were thinking, and let's see where this goes.
Hit me with it.
So I've been reading Alan Alda's book, Things I Overheard While Talking to Myself. It was written in 2007, and it covers a series of talks that he's given to colleges or certain like historical societies or stuff for scientists, any big talk that he's given. And he'll have the transcript of the talk and kind of what led up to it or his thought, just like his thoughts on the topics and everything like that. It's at 2001, the start of the internet, basically. It's been around for about 6 or 7 years or so, and people are starting to use it in new ways. And they had found this talk from Kurt Vonnegut that he had given to MIT students. And everyone, it blew up. Now, this was, I want to say, this talk had spread like a year or so ago before Alan Alda would quote it. Now, Alan Alda knew the story behind this talk, which I'm about to get into, but he started off this speech. I think it was at his daughter's graduation from college. And he started off this speech with the Kurt Vonnegut advice about living your life and things that you should do with life. So this was the speech that was shared around that he starts. He goes, here are a few words for the class of 2001. Wear sunscreen. If I could offer you only one tip for the future, sunscreen would be it. The long-term benefits of sunscreen have been proved by scientists, whereas the rest of my advice has no basis more reliable than my own meandering experience. I will dispense this advice now. Vonnegut went on to give them earnest advice like, don't be reckless with other people's hearts. Don't put up with people who are reckless with yours. He also urged them to floss and to stretch. Be careful whose advice you buy. Advice is a form of nostalgia. Dispensing it is a way of fishing the past from the disposal, wiping it off, painting over the ugly parts, and recycling it for more than it's worth. But trust me on the sunscreen. Now, I personally loved that part of it. I did love the idea that advice is a form of nostalgia. Yeah, advice is someone reflecting on the past. That it is a form of nostalgia and that it can be, as they put it here, fished from the disposal, wiped off, and painted over the ugly parts. So, I really enjoyed that part of the Kurt Vonnegut speech. Now, the twist that Alan Alda talks about, though, as he goes on to his speech, is that this is not a Kurt Vonnegut speech. This was written by some random woman in the Midwest. But everyone thought this was a Kurt Vonnegut speech, and it spread everywhere. News articles, people were quoting it in actual speeches and all sorts of stuff. People loved this speech, took over, and it was false. And so the whole speech that Alan Alda's given is about being careful about misinformation. And I thought that was interesting, but it was interesting to see how people reacted to false advice. Once it no longer had the weight of being a Kurt Vonnegut quote, and now it was just some random lady in the Midwest, it was almost like the advice that we all took in and were like, oh, that's a great quote, I love that, now meant nothing. It had no weight. And I thought, even if it's a great quote with power and resonance, but it doesn't have that name backing it, does it still carry the same weight?
Oh, there's a lot to dive into with that idea. So, okay, I'm gonna try to work through it kind of bit by bit. One, you have the idea that it is important to understand the context of any quote or any information and where it comes from, right? So if you have someone tell you, if someone did tell you, wear sunscreen or don't wear sunscreen, right? And one of them is a lifeguard who did it as over the summer for a couple years as a teenager, and one of them is an actual scientist who was studying sunscreen. Well, you should offer you should respect one of their opinions over the other, right? So there is a certain level of, we do have to pay attention to who is saying something. But it's interesting to me when the who isn't directly correlated with the subject that they're discussing. So it's not a matter of, well, the reason I care about the who is because this person knows about this thing.
Right.
It's because
they're not an expert in that field.
It's essentially kind of an emotional response. It's whoever this person is has already kind of earned a place in my heart, to which anything they do after this is already it's already got a preordained location in my acceptance. And that's, to me, that I think that's kind of where you're going with. That's the interesting part, is that if they're not someone where like I already like them. I'm pointing here like that the person's there. In my head, I'm picturing them right there. Yeah. But
over my shoulder.
Yeah.
That's creepy.
And so
what are they doing? What are they doing?
He doesn't like it when you do that. And so there's this weird thing that humans tend to fall into, where it's like, my mentor Scotty a long time ago once told me, he was like, dude, it doesn't matter about what you're doing necessarily. People buy into you. If you sell them on yourself, and I don't know if we've talked about this before, but if you sell them on yourself, you also sell them on whatever it is you're pushing or doing, right? Right. It's sales tactics. Like, get them to like you, and they'll kind of naturally like whatever it is you're also doing. And it goes in reverse. It's like if someone looks at this situation and they like, what is his name? Kurt
Vonnegut.
I don't even know who that is. A renowned writer.
Yeah.
They go, oh, it's from him. It must be great. It means it's great. And as soon as it's not from him, they don't even know anything about this lady from the Middle East. They have no idea of whether they're good or bad. But because it's no longer this person, it already has like a negative. Yeah. Do you know anything about what people were saying about it? What was it? Just
that they loved it, that they were like, this is such great advice and this is great.
I'm saying, when they found out it wasn't that person, were they like now calling it bad, or were they just upset that they were duped?
It seems like a mix of both. It seemed like now that advice had no real bearing, is what I was getting from. Again, this is a reflection from Alan Alda talking about that event. I don't remember the event happening, even though we were alive at that point. So it's hard for me to know exactly it, but it seemed like it lost a lot of its weight in its advice because of that, which is funny to me because the imagery of the idea of advice is a form of nostalgia, and you can pull it out of the, garbage disposal, paint it over, clean it off. Like, that imagery is so strong that to me, it almost doesn't matter if it was a renowned writer who wrote it, or some random person in the Midwest, because the imagery is still good. So it's funny to me to see that people now would react negatively towards it, almost as if it's a reaction to just being duped. But there's a part of me that also feels like it wouldn't have taken off if it was some random lady from the Midwest who has said it. What, like, I don't even know if she had it like on a blog. I have no idea, but it's not like that would now go spreading like it did because Kurt Vonnegut said it.
Do we know how it even got to that point where it was like...
I could look it up, but I don't right now how it got to that point. I don't know if it was intentionally she was posing as Kurt Vonnegut, like that she said, like, this is what Kurt Vonnegut said, or what have you. I have no idea if that was intentionally that way, or if it was some slip-up somehow. I have no idea. All I know is that there was a mix-up, and everyone was sharing it as if Kurt had said it. So what's interesting, I guess, to me about it, as well, that you're saying, is it is one of those things where it's like, if it's advice like you're talking about and you're getting it from an expert, well, that seems like a pretty clear-cut thing. You obviously are going to weigh if an expert's telling you something versus someone who's just an average person, obviously. But when it comes to things like you're saying that are more of an emotional response, you know, how do we judge the weight of what that has on us? Like, you're a big Jordan Peterson fan. Like, you read a lot of his stuff. If you had heard some of the advice that Jordan Peterson gave, but it was just from someone you work with at Yard House, phrased the exact same way, would it resonate?
That's a hard one, because
no matter what, the advice is solid.
I would like to think that it would, but there is a certain level of like, in my opinion, Jordan Peterson has sort of earned my trust. I've seen enough of his stuff. I've read enough of his stuff to where he's earned my trust. And when okay, this is
a few moments later. 2 hours later. Many months later.
Okay, so the reason that I'm uncomfortable with what I'm about to say is I don't mean it as dark as it's about to come off, but it technically, when you think about it, it is molestation. But like
with moles,
there's an infestation of them. Have you seen? Of course, you've seen the X-Men. When you have what's her name? She changes.
Mystique.
Mystique.
Yep.
When there's a scene where Mystique becomes Jean Grey, and then she starts hooking up with Wolverine, and then he finds out that it's actually Mystique, right?
A classic conundrum we can all relate to.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us. And there's this idea that, like, the reason that she was even allowed into the tent and on top of Wolverine and whatnot is because of the relationship that Jean...
Hold up. You didn't have to phrase it like that. Just saying the reason why she was allowed into the tent. But you went as far as to go, and on top of Wolverine.
Well, I mean, because it wasn't like on the side of him.
Do I have this invitation to get on top of you? Of course, because you're Jean Grey.
I noticed the invitation said I could come into the tent. But just a little clarification.
I am Jean Grey, so I am allowed.
Will I be on the side, or am I allowed on top of the Wolverine? Just clarification. But there is this idea that, like, because of who someone is, we allow them access to certain parts of ourselves in ways of being trusting. And the example I'm giving is a physical sense. Like, the reason that person was allowed into the tent was because they were Jean Grey. It was someone that he trusted, and so that all felt natural. As soon as it was Mystique, it was an invasion. It was like I trusted you on the pretense that you were someone or something. And so to some extent, even though I think good advice should be good advice, period, I do agree with that statement. But there is some certain level of, like, if I sort of let you in and I trust you based on who you are, who I've learned you to be, and I find out that someone was instead impersonating you, there is a certain level of, well, like, my trust was given to you, right, not this other person. It doesn't necessarily mean that the advice given is any less valuable, but it does mean that I received it and took it in under false pretenses, which means that the way that I accept that advice was altered based on those assumptions. And who you hear advice from does change sort of the weird context of advice. Advice, because, like you said in that quote, it has something to do with nostalgia. Nostalgia is an emotional response. So advice isn't always clean and objective. Sometimes advice is sort of subjective, and advice depends on where you are and where you're coming from, and it depends on who's telling the story and who's giving the advice. All of those variables come in, and that's what molds the advice to you, and that's how you are able to take it in and make it work for yourself. And so if someone told me something and it was coming from Jordan Peterson or someone else I really respect and trust, and I found out it wasn't them, I would still have to evaluate that what that person said, but it would have a different it would just be viewed through a different lens.
Yeah, it's almost interesting to, like, I guess hypothetically speaking, like, what if someone said, hey, Jordan Peterson one time said this, and you go, that's a great quote, I love that, and then you do look it up, and it's not Jordan Peterson. And let's not even go as far as say it was like a terrible person who said it was just a nobody. Yeah, does that now? There does seem to be this sense of betrayal. And I don't know if that betrayal is what makes us then go, ugh, I don't want that quote now. Like, oh, now it's tainted. I don't know. But it's also, to me, so interesting because we're talking about words. We're talking about quotes. We're talking about these things. But it's also applicable in art, right? Like, we find out some painting. Now, I'm no art critic, right? But if you give me a bunch of type of like strokes and stuff and you go, that's a Picasso, I'm like, oh, okay, that has weight, that has value to it, right? Because of the name behind it. But then if you were to find that it's a counterfeit, which does, significantly drops the value, or even that it wasn't even a counterfeit of a Picasso, it wasn't anything but just some random like CSUN student who like threw a few brushstrokes on it and sold it as a Picasso, right? Even if it looked like it could have been an artist's work, because it isn't that artist's work, it has no value. And that's an interesting take. That's an interesting idea, because how much weight do we give to a name?
That's a slippery slope on that one. I don't know what the exact, because part of me again it thinks that some things should be objective. Like if someone can draw the Mona Lisa as well as the original Mona Lisa was drawn, you would then kind of want to say that both are equally valuable.
Yeah.
That should, it feels like that should be the way that we view it, because the only reason we should have appreciated the Mona Lisa in the first place was because of the level of beauty and artistry that it was. Right. So you would think that if someone can get to that same level, that they should be equally valued. But there is
it's not Da Vinci.
That's kind of how when you look at how humans became to be, like the evolution of humans, one of the things that allowed us to become very successful was the ability to create rumor, the ability to create myth and legend, to create something bigger than an individual that pulls people together. And so a huge part of what humans do is they look at something, they see how good it is, they value it and give it some sort of social value and some sort of social placing. And then once it goes from present tense to past tense, we then start to add a mythos to it, a legend to it. Yeah. And those things increase value tenfold. What if you and I did anything incredible today, it would be so much more of a dramatic story 10 years from now when we retell it. Because there's just a nature of we're talking about what once was. You cannot revisit that other than through us telling you about that thing. And so there is this weird, like if you have the Mona Lisa, the fact that it's the Mona Lisa of what once was would make it more valuable than the Mona Lisa of what is currently. Absolutely.
Like it has that weight and it has that significance to it. Yeah, I see that. I'm also interested in the idea of like ownership. When an artist has ownership over their craft to such an extent that they're able to control the factors that make it great. People can stumble across greatness. We've seen a variety of one-hit wonders in a variety of different artistic areas. Yeah. Right? Music, movies, everything like that. But to be great is to be able to, on some level, control greatness, control the aspects of what we think are above average, well above average, right? And so for example, I believe it was Picasso, speaking of him, he was stopped in an airport, right? And a lady goes, "Can you draw me something? Can you just draw me something?" Gave him like a napkin or something like that. He goes, "Yeah, no problem." Took 30 seconds, drew something, handed it back to her, said, "That'll be $3,000. And she said, "No, how could it be $3,000? You did that in 30 seconds. He goes, "No, it took me 30 years to do that. I've been doing, like, his whole artistic journey has led up to that one moment that you got to see in 30 seconds. But it took him 30 years to get to that level. So that's what you're paying the man for." And the idea of, because of his craftsmanship and because of who he is, he's able to control the aspects that made him great, and that gives it weight. That gives the stuff that he does weight, because one of my most prime examples I wanted your input on here was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, Katie hated Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Absolutely hated it. I loved it.
Yeah, you and I are pretty fond of that one.
Loved it. It's one of the most rewatchable films to me. I constantly go back, even if it's just to watch 20 or 30 minutes of it. I'm instantly transported to 1969 Hollywood. It's very authentic of that time. It's nostalgic in all the right ways. The pacing is just, some people will call it slow, but I just love how it just exists in this time frame. Someone asked if this wasn't a Tarantino movie, this was just some random director directed this, right? Maybe if you didn't even have Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, you had two actors who were doing it just as well as maybe they would have, but it doesn't have Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt in it. Do we still view it the same way? Does the pacing that is now, I'm in the hands of an artist in Tarantino, now does that pacing become, man, this is slow, maybe you could cut this scene or shorten this scene up, or, wow, it was really a 3-hour movie, maybe we could have done this in about 2.5 hours, 2:25. So does the idea that it's a Tarantino film with these A-list actors that we love, does that allow us more patience and enjoyment of the film? Or is the film just great regardless of the names?
I don't see why it couldn't be sort of a blending of the two, right? So Steve Martin talked about when he was on top of the world as far as a comedian, he talked about he quit because at a certain point he couldn't tell if he was funny or not, because people just laughed at anything he did. And so he started to lose the concept of, like, am I even doing good? Bill Burr talks about the same thing. It got to a point where, like, Bill Burr talks about going to places where they didn't even know him, because that was the only way he could actually tell if he was still good at this stuff or not, because people would see that it was Bill Burr and laugh at anything that Bill Burr says, because Bill Burr is Bill Burr, right? They already assumed he was funny, and so he didn't actually have to try to be funny. So you do have that certain aspect that people will really buy into who you are. If it's a positive view that they have of you, they'll assume that thing's going to happen, and so they have a leniency on certain things. That does tend to happen. If Denzel gives a subpar performance, I'm probably more tempted to say that it was still really good, because Denzel just does good shit, right? And so it does kind of stop me from viewing it objectively. That does happen. But kind of relating it to what you said earlier, the other part of it that I think is kind of unfair that people forget this or dismiss this is that the reason that we might be overlooking certain things is because Quentin Tarantino earned that from us.
Yeah,
Brad Pitt earned that from us. Leonardo earned that from us. And so we might be looking at it with an air of, like, perhaps we're not being as objective as we could be. But that's because at one point someone was, and someone went, but that's good shit. Right. And after that happened a certain amount of times, they got to a point where, like, oh, it's Quentin, it's Leo, it's Brad, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
And starting that, so here's the thing, positive mindsets affect us on a psychological level. We understand that, right? Telling yourself something's good or is going to be good tends to affect the fact that it actually ends up being good, right? If you go into something thinking negative thoughts, it's far more likely to end up negative. So when someone earns a positive perspective, then it then would suggest that we're more likely to have a positive experience.
There's a great analogy or something that people use when there's an unproven director trying to tell a very tough story, something that's could be easily convoluted or something, and you're hesitant to go into it. If it's a director that you don't know enough about or don't necessarily trust, there's always this uneasiness when you're watching their thing that something could go off the rails at any time. And when you're in the hands of a true artist and someone who is universally great, like a Tarantino, that trust is there from the moment you sit your butt in the seat. You go, it's like you're strapped in for the roller coaster and you got your seatbelt on, you got your little thing over you, so you're not going to fly out of it, right? And like, I can just enjoy the ride that they're about to take me on. And if you have an unproven director who hasn't earned that trust that you're talking about, you're like, when's this thing going to go off the rails? When, like, that was a great scene, hope the next one can live up to it. And you're always like, and so there is that sense of same with the musician, same with anything. When you see a pro doing their thing, you always are able to relax a little bit more when you're watching a performance.
I was talking to this with a friend of mine once, and they were struggling with, because they had an image of who they were, and they knew that they were sort of displaying this image because of what they've done in the past, right? So people have seen patterns in them and started making sort of
judgments
an expectation of who they are,
right?
And that person wanted to change that, and they would do something. Let's say you do. What I tried to explain to this person is like, if I were to, this is a dramatic way to put it, but if I were to hit someone, let's say 5 times in a row, right? Every time I move my hand, I smack the shit out of them.
Right. You're pulling from real life experience here,
yeah,
right?
Sometimes you got to smack somebody. But if I smack them 5 times, and so they begin to get this understanding that every time I raise my hand, I'm going to smack them. And then I decide I'm going to change things up. I'm tired of them thinking I'm going to smack them. Right? I'm a good guy, right? I don't want to smack anybody anymore. So if I decide to make that change,
my hands hurt from smacking.
If I decide to make that change, I can't be surprised when on the 6th time, when I don't intend to smack them, that they still flinch. Right. And perhaps even on the 7th or the 8th or the 9th. Because what happens is when you begin to understand a pattern in somebody or something, it takes you almost twice as long of the opposite of that thing for you to change your understanding. So if I've smacked someone 5 times in a row, so every time I move my hand, I smack them, it might take me 10 times of moving my hand and not smacking them for them to even begin to go, maybe his hand moving doesn't mean he's going to smack me, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how we kind of work. We pick up on those patterns. And so it works in the same way with positive things.
Right.
If we look at someone who's done something good 10 times in a row, well, it might take them 20 for us to be convinced that they actually lost the what.
I don't know. I feel like you can lose that trust pretty quickly. I think like a few of them, and you're done. Like even if they done.
So
10,
let's not use the numbers in specific.
One of my favorite examples of that you're kind of talking about artistically is, let's look at M. Night Shyamalan. Right, out of the gate hot. People are like, M. Night Shyamalan is the next great horror suspense director that we got, right? And then he starts having a series of flops. You could say The Village, though The Village has actually aged surprisingly well, actually. Like Lady in the Water and like all these other ones. He just had, The Happening. He had a series of bombs. And so then if you saw an M. Night Shyamalan movie being advertised in the early 2000s, you were just kind of like, ugh, it's not going to be good. It's going to have an unnecessary twist. It's just not going to be good. Like, he lost all audience trust. And then he came out with The Visit, which you're like, oh, okay, that's not a bad M. Night Shyamalan film. All right. And then he did Split, and people are like, oh, okay, M. Night's back, right? And then to see the reaction to Glass before the movie had come out, everyone was now back in, we kind of trust M. Night has found his footing again. Everyone was like, I'm excited to see Glass because the last 2 M. Night movies were pretty good, if not great. And so everyone was like excited. I didn't see Glass, but the reviews for it were not good. And everyone's like, oh no. Like, to watch the roller coaster that is fans reacting to M. Night Shyamalan making stuff is basically what we're talking about here, about how much you can build trust, lose trust, gain it back, and then potentially lose it again.
Yeah, I do think certain mediums allow you to lose trust a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But like, if you look at any great basketball player, for instance. You look at LeBron James. If LeBron James had a terrible game tomorrow, no one's going to question that he's still LeBron James. It would take a long list. It would take a long number of games before someone goes, LeBron's lost it.
Yeah,
because he's done so much good. We've seen him go down, but we always seen him come back up. And so certain mediums are different. Movies, they take they could take a year to 2 years to make, and then you release it. So when it's a bomb, it has a little more weight to it.
Because it carries for so much longer.
Yeah, but if you look at something that's more like a performance. Not performance driven, but just look at sports and stuff like that. You can see that aspect.
There are some things that you can hold on. It's interesting to talk about the idea because you were talking about Steve Martin and Bill Burr and how they didn't. I did want to mention, like, there are people like Bob Dylan who intentionally made a bad record because everyone was like, he's the next coming of musical Jesus, basically, at that moment, and he just didn't want that pressure. And so he just made an intentionally bad record, which, because he was Bob Dylan, people still were like, I don't know, man, there's really something here. This is actually pretty good if you listen to it. And like Bob's like, no, I made that as bad as possible. And Stephen King would go on he had for a long time a different name. He had a fake alias because he was so sick of people just loving because his name was on a project. So he did a whole new alias. Now what I'm interested in is how well did those other books under a different name sell, right? Because same writer, same exact talent and skill level, but it doesn't have Stephen King on the front of it.
Yeah,
I haven't looked that up, but that'd be interesting to see.
It's a weird way in which to view things, because there's an importance to understanding who is saying something and to making sure that you value who that person is and what comes from them appropriately. But there also is a certain level of objectivity that we have to always maintain.
Yeah.
What makes a thing good in the first place should always be kind of the forefront. And then who someone is might allow us some level of leniency or faith or trust, whatever you want to call it, but we should still be operating first under like what makes something objectively good. And so we might look at some movie and maybe like we'll see a trailer of a movie from Quentin Tarantino and go, that looks really stupid. But then we have this secondary thing that goes, but it is Tarantino. He's done some good stuff. I have some faith and trust in him, so I'm gonna hold that judgment until I see it. But I do think that the first thing should be that objectivity, which means if we're going way back to the beginning, if you hear a quote and it's a good quote, besides the betrayal of like someone told you it came from this person, you really like that person, so you just kind of double down on like, yeah, that person's full of great shit. That first layer of objectivity should allow you to go, well, that's still some solid wisdom. Instead of being so upset and sort of denouncing that wisdom, you should be instead like, oh, I was attributing it to the wrong source.
Right.
Someone else was responsible for this great quote, but it shouldn't take away from how great the quote is, especially if the quote isn't about any particular level of
yeah, absolutely.
So
that's what I think. I think in all these mediums, and I think you just, as we'll wrap it up here, I think that's just in all these mediums, whether it's art, whether it's a quote, whether it's a movie, if you like the thing, don't feel ashamed if the creator is some unknown or it's not who it, whatever the quote was, it's not who actually said the quote. If you like it and it resonates with you, that's what's important. That's what's important. It's a good film regardless of if a notable director's name is attached to it. Because at one point, Quentin Tarantino made Reservoir Dogs and everyone was like, this guy's good. Like, this is a good film. And he had no cachet back then. He earned it, like you said. So if you like something, don't get out of sorts just because, it's not some notable name that had said it or done it.
Yeah, well, I mean, to piggyback off of that, you should just have a good understanding of what you consider good and why you consider something good. And that should be your foundation. Yep. And once that's your foundation, then you shouldn't be led astray very much. Because if someone who you really love does something bad, you should still be able to have an understanding of, well, I still love it because it's them, but I recognize that it's not the, I love Dave Matthews, right? Everyone who knows me knows that. There's some of his songs where I'm like,
if you ask Freddie, Dave Matthews has never made a bad song.
No, he has. there's some, the world's about to explode. There's some songs I've showed people of Dave Matthews where I'm like, hey, this song, if you're a fan of Dave Matthews, you're going to love this song. Yeah. If you're not a fan of Dave Matthews, this is not the song for you. I look at the song and I go, this is terrible.
Right.
But I know the story and I know why it's this way and why it's that way. So this is a song just for fans. And that's what comes first. Know why it is you think something's good. Go from there. And then once you get that and establish that, don't feel guilty about liking something because of where it came from or who it came from.
Yeah.
Those are two separate functioning parts that both should be exercised and worked out.
Love it. Which is why this podcast has a lot of value, because you guys like this podcast. You love this podcast. And one day when we're all famous and smart, they'll be like, this was good advice.
Instead of not famous and just dumb as shit.
Just dumb as shit.
just
and
dumb as a bag of dicks.
The advice is still good.
Yeah, it's still quality advice from stupid idiots.
That's where we're going to end it today. Thank you guys for listening to these two stupid idiots.
Absolutely. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. If you're on Spotify, please download the episode. We appreciate you being here.
We really do.
It's always a good time.
All right, we'll catch you next week.